Hey everybody, welcome to the final card reveal episode for the Showdown in the Badlands. We'd seen like 99.99% of the set, but there were a few more cards to observe, and a lot of them were legendary, so, you know, they could have drastic impacts to the set, a la Reno. Anyway, first and foremost, because this is going to be a bit all over the place, let's remind ourselves of the rogue thief contraband package, because the legendary that was revealed relates to this. So we have the Azurite Scorpion that could generate 4 random spells, which could be spells from other classes because it's random. Shell Game gave you cards from other classes. Stick Up was a quick draw card from other classes, and Wishing Well was a legendary from another class and said it's cost a 1. So what is the legendary we're waiting for? What is going to sew this package together into something that is going to be a good deck? Well, apparently, it's Velorok Windblade, 3 mana 3/3. While it's in your hand, play 3 cards from other classes to reveal Velorok's true form. And Velorok's true form is Velorok the Deceiver, 3 mana 3/6 dragon with charge. After this attacks, discover a card from another class. It costs 3 less. Okay, well, definitely if you're going to run a contraband package, you'll be running this card. You definitely don't want to play Velorok before you've revealed its true form, because otherwise it's a 3 mana 3/3, which is pretty bad. If you're in an aggro matchup, though, sometimes you might have to just do that, though, right? To evaluate this card, let's look at Velorok the Deceiver's form. It's kind of close to Reconnaissance and Stormwind Knight having a baby. It's actually a little bit better statted than that. It's 1 mana cheaper than Stormwind Knight with one of stats more. And Reconnaissance was discovered a Death Rattle minion, which costs 2 less, but it was a 2 mana card. This is, you get a card that costs 3 less, so you're getting a 1 mana further discount, but it's kind of, the card was 1 mana more than Reconnaissance. Typically when you package stuff together, you know, it gets better, so I think Velorok is actually a pretty good card, and would probably have seen some play, maybe, as just like a value add to other decks. Unfortunately, I don't think this whole thing is going to work. I don't think this is good enough payoff to run cards from other classes. Like, you could just play Reconnaissance on the board. Okay, Stormwind Knight didn't see much play at all, but you could always just play a Chargeman in your deck, right, without all this jumping through hoops to play 3 cards from other classes, most of which will probably be bad because you're discovering random cards from other classes, and cards from other classes on average are probably going to be weaker than cards that are synergistic with cards from your class, right? Sometimes, though, it's going to pay off really big, and you're going to feel really happy. But I promise you, that's like 1 in 6 games you're going to go up against this Thief Contraband deck, and it's going to have insane discover cards from other classes, and they're going to just roll you, and you're going to be like, why? Why am I not playing this deck? And then you're going to play it, and 5 of the 6 games are going to be miserable. You're going to discover, infuse 3 demons, and summon all those demons, and you're like, oh, well, I don't have any demons, so I'm screwed! Getting back to this as well, the only other payoff we've got for running cards from other classes is Test Greymane. And I think people will try and play with this, but I think it'll still be a tier 4 deck. It's just not a big enough payoff, right? And I think some people might argue as well, like, you know, it's not that hard to remove Velorok the Deceiver from the board, and it's only going to push 3 damage to the face, so it's not that aggressive. Rogue also doesn't have a lot of access to minion buffing cards, or hand buffing cards for that matter. And do I think it's worth jumping through hoops to bounce Velorok back to your hand so that you can just keep charging it to the face? No, it's not. You'd probably prefer to bounce Test back. And at the end of the day, you're always going to have 2 issues with this deck that just can't be really resolved. Firstly, Value Rogue is always going to struggle. Typically, Value decks want to be decks that go into a later game so that you can actually play that value, and Rogue is not good at going into the late game. They haven't got particularly good control options, they don't have a lot of good sustain, not a lot of great board clear, so you have to randomly generate these cards for you, and if you randomly generate a card that clears Test, then you can't bounce Test back for like the infinite value, so there's like a very small subset of cards from other classes that you want. So I think all in all, this package just won't work. Also, in terms of, like, you know, bouncing back the charge minion, Demon Hunter has access to Azsharan Defector, which is a card that I'd argue you have to go through less hoops to jump through to get its payoff, which is the Sunken Defector is I think it's a 5/3 charge, right? That if it attacks, it does 3 damage to the opponent's face. So if it goes to the face, it does 8 damage. And Demon Hunter doesn't just bounce this card back to their hand because it's too slow to set all this up. I think this is just going to be too slow. I think you'll be dead before you do any of this. And you're probably going to just discover bad cards anyway. But at the very least, this is... Oh, you're going to generate, sorry. At the very least, this is discover a card from another class, so you get to choose the card you want, which is obviously better than getting a random card from another class. But I'm sorry, any Thief, Contraband, Rogue lovers out there, this set will not be your golden age. Next is the Mage card. I speculated this was going to be an elemental, and it is an elemental. 6 mana, 6/5, Mez Aduan the Fractured. Battlecry, draw an elemental, split into 2 halves. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not entirely certain exactly how this card works. They showed a case example for Ragnaros. So for Ragnaros, they showed it as if it's split, it becomes like a 4 mana 4/4, and it retains its effect, so it'll still do 8 damage to the opponent, and you'll get both of these, right? I don't know what happens when you have odd cost attack, odd cost health. I don't know if one of them will get like at random the extra health, or it'll round. Who knows? Because it wasn't really explained well. Anyway, Rag's obviously a reasonable choice for this because if it keeps the effect, you obviously want to get cards that aren't just stats, right? You want to duplicate a card that is a really good effect where the stats don't matter as much. And actually maybe better to play at a cheaper mana. So, just as a pool of additional cards for this, Tainted Remnant, which is in the Mage package, has, if you play an elemental last turn, deal 7 damage split between all enemies. That effect is obviously good irrespective of how it's split. Again, I don't know if you're going to get a 2 and a 3 mana copy of this if you split it with 3 and 4 attack and 2 health. Who knows? It also helps, by the way, because a lot of the elemental effects are, if you played an elemental last turn, it gives you 2 cheap elementals that you can weave into turns to keep this effect, proliferating. Within the neutral class, you've also got Eroded Sediment, which is a nice value add. This could be a 1 or a 2 mana card, and it will discover an elemental from the past. Again, that's more value. Neptulon is an elemental. And what's even neater about this is you don't really care if it gets its stats split because it's the hands that attack it, right? And they won't get split. So you could have 2 5-mana Neptulons. That's really a really big payoff, honestly. And then finally, Thunderbringer, which, is out right now, but is coming with this set. Summon an elemental and beast from your deck as a Death Rattle. Death Rattles obviously don't really mind that they've been split up. Obviously, the stats do somewhat matter, but if you get a 4-mana 3/3 Thunderbringer, that if you've built your deck around this to tutor for good elementals and good beasts, that could be some big value turns, right? You drop Thunderbringers or 2 Thunderbringers down on the board, and your opponent knows if they kill them, 4 minions are coming out, which are probably going to be really good minions, because you're probably only going to put big elementals and big beasts in your deck. That's pretty good. Where I think this will, though, see actual play, because I think most of the rest of it is a meme, to be honest with you. I think this card will be running to the Elemental Mage package, and I think the Elemental Mage package will run some very cheap spells, and most importantly, they'll run Age Win. And what I think is going to happen is, you're going to try and rely on getting Age Win killed on 5. That's going to be the dream for this deck, having Age Win early. You might even have to try and tutor to get this card, but I don't know how you're going to do that just yet. Age Win dies. Its effect then goes on to the next minion you draw. If you play Mezadune after this, presumably it will split the card that inherits the power, so you'll get Age Win's effect on 2 cards. If you happen to get this, and this might actually also, be irrelevant to Mezadune, I'm not actually sure you're going to run Mezadune actually in the Elemental Mage package, but this is a case in point to get 2 of Age Win's effects. If you get Overflow Surger, and it is drawn with Age Win's effect, and you've been playing Elementals for 7 turns, you're going to have 7 minions with Age Win's spellcast effect, the spell damage effect on it, which is 14 spell damage. That's a lot of spell damage, and honestly, it might combo some people down. So I kind of see this as like being a tempo aggressive deck where your final goal to kill the opponent is to get Age Win's effect copied onto Overflow Surger, or with Mezadune onto another elemental that, splits into 2. And what's even nicer is if you don't kill the opponent that turn, they have to deal with your board. And when they do deal with your board, all of those effects go to the next minion you draw. So you'll have 7 times Age Wind's effect on 1 minion, which is still plus 14 spell damage. It's basically, you're dead unless you silence it. Unfortunately, there's a really good way of silencing minions right now. I did put the card on here. The new Reno card, he's going to really mess that deck up, so I think it's all going to be a pipe dream, sadly. Now on to Warrior. Warrior was missing 2 cards, and we've now been shown these cards. And they relate to the excavation package, because we've only been shown Reinforced Plating, which was gain 6 armor, excavated treasure, which I didn't think was going to see any play, but now I actually think that Control Warrior might go Highlander just to run Reno, in which case Reinforced Plating will probably make that deck, irrespective of the excavation package. And Blast Charge, which was a bad card, 3 mana destroy a damaged enemy minion, excavate a treasure. Terrible, terrible card. It's basically 1 mana execute with 2 mana draw a card. Disgusting. But maybe the treasure and the treasure payoffs are worth it, right? Here's one of the the excavation payoffs. Badlands Brawler, 7 mana 4/4, Battlecry, start a brawl. If you've excavated twice, this always wins. Okay, so Brawl is a 5 mana spell. This is a 7 mana 4/4 that comes with the Brawl, which you could kind of see as a 2 mana 4/4, which is good stats. However, if you haven't excavated twice, there's no guarantee it's going to win the Brawl, in which case you've basically cast 7 mana Brawl, which is obviously pretty bad, right? And it's not like Warrior's lacking for control options right now. If this had come out before, Sanitize and... I forgot the other one where you forge to do 10 damage, like Split Up. This probably would have saw play in a Control Warrior deck. I don't think Control Warrior would be good if that was the case, but it probably would have seen some play. Sadly, though, it's best case scenario. You excavated twice, you've played the bad excavation cards, it wins the Brawl. You're really looking at this being a 7 mana Soul Stealer, which is destroy all of the minions, get a corpse for each destroyed, and it leaves a 5/5 on the board. So for 1 less mana, you get 1/1 less stats. But it's not quite an equivalent because obviously the Death Knight gets the corpses. And also, Soul Stealer's not really seeing any play right now. It's just too slow. It doesn't help you versus the combo decks. It doesn't help you versus the aggro decks because it comes up too late. It's really just a mid-range beater-upper. And mid-range is in a big sad place right now, and it's only going to get sadder, so... I think Badlands Brawler will not see play in a tier 1 deck. I don't think the Excavation Warrior will be a tier 1 deck either. But hey, we're jumping the gun here. Let me look at the other cards. The big legendary payoff. 4 mana, 16/16. Elemental Beast. That's right, 4 mana, 16/16. Rush and Taunt. That has to be a downside, right? Yeah, you can say there's a downside. Dormant for 8 turns. Excavate to awaken 2 turns sooner, though. This is the excavation payoff, or one of the excavation payoffs at the very least, because we've still not seen the treasure yet. We will do in a moment, though. 4 mana, 16/16. If you don't excavate, you can kind of treat that each turn is adding 1 mana to the cost, because it's like the card will come up that many turns later. Sure, you're paying for it in the past. Okay, it's kind of hard to explain this. I would treat the additional turns as basically a mana, because if you let this dormant timer count through, you're not going to be playing this to like turn 12 at like the earliest. At which point, like, you've kind of wasted the mana just having this slag more on the board and losing that tempo. And I kind of equate that to like a mana a turn-ish. However, if you're excavating, and that's 2 turns sooner, excavate 1 time, this is coming up in 6 turns. 2 times, which is what you need for your other reward, that's 4 turns. That means it's going to come up around the 8 mana mark, and you've paid this forwards for 4 instead. And, you've basically got the interest on it, right? Your interest is a 16/16 instead of what would have been a normal 4/4 rush taunt minion. Do I think this card is going to see play? It's insane stats for the costs, and is this a big enough payoff to run these bad excavation cards? Because again, if you excavate this thing 4 times, it awakens next turn. No. To cut it short, no. I think this card is actually really, really bad. Why? Because Reno the Lone Ranger exists. I don't think it's realistic that you're going to get the 4 excavations in a turn to, awaken it the next turn is ever going to happen. That's just a pipe dream. And even if you do that, you're probably doing this around 10 mana, so, a decent hefty chunk into the game. And this is where I've postulated this in videos in the past. How big would a neutral statted minion, so a minion with no effect, have to be to see playing competitive? So let's say, you had an 8 or 10 mana card. Let's say 10 mana. How many stats would you have to have on that minion to actually see play in a deck? Because I'm not convinced if you had a 10 mana 16/16 printed, it would go into a standard deck. I think it's too weak now. I do think 16/16 is around about the mark the way you start to think about it, because that is 2-turn lethal if it stays on the board. But there's just so many ways to remove things now. And also, Reno, you might not even let this guy wake up. I didn't even consider that with Reno. When it empties the board, if you've got anything dormant, it will empty it. It will get rid of it. So you might play 4 mana, then excavate 2 or 3 times to get the turn timer down just a little bit. You've played these garbage cards. And then Reno just comes along and poof, it's all gone. So not only did you lose tempo for playing a 4 mana do nothing, you've then played 2 or 3 excavation cards, which are basically all worse than the average card. And then Reno just comes along and just erases that for 1 card, and then makes it harder to respond to the Reno turn. It's just not going to happen. I'm sorry, it just won't happen. Also, Slagmaw the Slumbering, if it does awaken and your opponent's not playing a Highlander Reno deck, it should be a shame if you got cleared by a 1 mana spell, right? Right? And there's just so many single card removals that Slagmaw, I think you're going to remain Slumbering. I ended up drawing a meme template of this. What do I think Slagmaw the Slumbering really is? It's just a worse Assassinate when you rip the mask off. If you do all these things, he's going to rush 1 time, hit something for 16 damage, which is effectively, I'm going to kill a minion, because not a lot of things will survive through 16 damage, right? That's basically Assassinate. But Assassinate doesn't have to go through all these hoops, because Slagmaw is probably going to get frozen, cleared, something's going to happen to it, right? Devolved in some way. Yeah, that's going to just be misery. And in fact, it's going to be really misery for Evolved Shamans if you evolve into this fucking thing. Because Shaman, they don't have access to Excavate, right? They have access to the Highlander package. So evolving to Slagmaw, it's like, well, I have this board space taken for 8 turns. I will lose before it awakens. Big sad times. Anyway, all this being said and done, perhaps the treasure is so worth it that you won't run this legendary payoff, and instead you want to excavate 4 times because the treasure is so insane. And actually the treasure is insane. 4 mana 5/5 elemental beast, Battlecry, discover 2 8-cost minions, summon them. Okay, you could kind of treat a 4 mana 5/5, I think, as a 4 mana card. I think that's fair enough. 2 8-cost minions is 16 mana, so you're getting like a 20 mana package for 4 mana. That is a really, really good deal. And if you look at the pool, we might as well look at the pool because, we have time for this. There's 17 cards in the 8 mana pool that's access to, warrior and neutral. 4 of them in warrior. Grommash Hellscream is a great get. It has charge, it can push the 4 damage quickly, and basically is a minion that your opponent has to deal with, because if you ever damage it, it gets +6 attack, and you can not risk warrior not having access to, 1 damage to a minion, because they might do. There's then 3 cards in warrior, which are just bad. Odin has got a Battlecry, otherwise it's an understated 8 mana minion. Tidal Revenant, again understated, has a Battlecry, and Boomboss Thogren, understated, is a Battlecry, so you wouldn't really want those other 3 cards. At the very least, though, don't let me, twist you up on this. It's still good to get, 20 mana worth of cards, stuff, even if 8 mana of it is just for an 8/8. It's still a really good deal, but you want something with a little bit of an extra plus to it, right? Especially if you're discovering it. So I think you're going to want to get Grommash. From the neutral package, I think there's 4 particularly good cards. In no particular order. Kolaghan is probably a decent get, even though it doesn't see any play in any deck right now. It has Rush on it, so you can immediately do something. You can clear off a really annoying minion from your opponent. And if they clear Kolaghan, at the very least, they have to play it again, and it causes them to waste mana. So I think in this situation, it's not the worst thing to discover. Also, if you get, like, you know, Colligan plus Gromash, you might be able to just push some damage through. If you're running it like an Odin deck with this Excavate package, there might be a really annoying taunt in the way, like a taunt reborn minion. Colligan it, get rid of it. It won't break its Death Rattle, right? It's going to move it to its hand, and you're free just to hit the face. Kael'thas, that card has not seen any competitive play for quite a while because it keeps getting nerfed. Every third minion you play each turn costs 0. If you imagine you play the Azerite Ox, you get Kael'thas Sinstrider, you get another minion. If you can play something else on top of the Azerite Ox, which is pretty reasonable because it's only a 4-mana card, you might get another minion for free at the end of all of this. So you could kind of see your turn as not only getting the 16-mana discount from the Azerite Ox, not including, you know, its own body, but an X-mana discount from another minion that you put in your deck. And if this is something like Odin, that is disgusting, right? You'll have the 4-mana 5/5, an 8-mana 4/7, let's just say an 8-mana 8/8 as another thing you'd get from the Azerite Ox, plus an 8-mana 8/8. That's a lot of stats, and that might be just enough to overwhelm your opponent. Then we've got some that are situationally decent. Uzamat is reasonable, but don't pick it as your first discovery, because otherwise you won't get your second one, I believe. I'm no expert on this, like, you know, ordering during a turn thing. I'm actually pretty bad at it. But I'm pretty certain the way it'll read this is the minion you played will obviously be on the board. Then it will put on the first minion you discover via the battle cry, right, which will be Uzamat. And then Uzamat will fill the board with his tentacles, and then it will try and put your other minion you discovered on the board, but it won't have any board space, so it will just be, you know, eliminated. Basically, you're losing 8 mana for no reason. However, if you get Uzamat as your second choice, that is fine, because you'll get your other chosen 8 drop, and then Uzamat will go onto the board, and you'll lose 2 tentacles, which is kind of irrelevant. Invincible is a reasonable get as well. You might want to run undeads in your deck. There are, I think there's one other undead in the 8 mana pool, which was Mishmash Mosh, which I didn't even talk about again, but that's a fast. Actually, you know what? Let me just go back a second. I ignored these. Rag is obviously good because it's 8 mana. It's going to do 8 damage quickly. And Mishmash Mosher is also a quick answer for, like, a board. So it might be a board clear. It is also an undead, so if you get that plus Invincible, you know, you might get a nice little buff on it as well. I think, though, typically, Warriors will not run undead cards. Therefore, I think Invincible is just going to be a sticky minion. Like, it's going to be a 5/5 reborn, basically, which is still okay. And then finally, Thunderbringer. You might want to run an Elemental and a Beast in your Warrior deck, just so that if you do find Thunderbringer, there might be a payoff additionally to that. That kind of makes the minion stickier and harder to clear. Finally, there are then 6 other cards, and they're basically all just understated minions. It's basically minions with battle cries. 2 of them have Taunt, though, so if you're really desperate for Taunt, you might still pick those ones. So I've not done the full math on this. Basically, it's a 9 in 17 of the pool. They don't have another upside, they're just stats. 3 out of 17 are situationally have an upside, and 5 of the 17 have an upside. I couldn't figure out the masters how to do this, because you're discovering from, like, you know, Discovery gives you 3 choices, and you get 2 discoveries. How the percentage would work for, like, getting a card with an upside, but I think it's going to be around the, just like gut mass, I think it's around the 65% mark it's going to be, that you're going to get a card with an upside. So it's a pretty good deal, right? I'm being sincere here, it's a good deal. And in the past, we have seen a card like this. We saw Drakefire Amulet. This was arguably like a 16 mana. Like, you got 16 mana of value from this. Discovering 2 dragons was around the 8 mana range, because dragons are, you know, are typically higher statted and higher mana costed than the average minion. And what Drakefire Amulet would do in decks when it saw playing competitive was it was in Big Spell Mage, and you would discount the spell to like 5 mana, and you would play a 5 mana spell, get 16 mana of value, so you'd cheat like 11 mana, and that was enough to overwhelm some people. Also, sometimes you would swap the cost with a spell in your opponent's hand, and sometimes this would be like 1 mana or 0 mana, and then truly you would have the... Oh, well, your opponent would have the worst time ever, but you would have the best time ever. Maniacal laughing occurs. So, there's actually a precedent to the Azerite Ox. Maybe, irrespective of all of the other bad stuff, maybe it's good enough to see play, because it is 4 mana. So maybe the hoops are worth jumping through, because it was for Drakefire Amulet. However, Drakefire Amulet didn't have a certain someone in the pool right now who could just wipe your board away and not trigger your death rattles from the minions with upsides and so on. So I actually think the Excavation Warrior package is it's just not going to come to fruition. I don't think it's going to be better than the Odin Control Warrior there is right now. I think you're probably going to want to run a Highlander Odin Control Warrior to abuse Odin. Not Odin. You will be abusing Odin, but to abuse Reno. And I don't think there's going to be room for the full Excavation package in that. But you might actually put the 6 armor Excavator card in that deck, though, as a one-off. I think it will actually just make the cut. There is then one final card, and this was out before any of the other reveals, because everyone got given this, and I didn't rate it. Thunderbringer. So it's an 8-mana 6/6 elemental beast, taunt, death rattle, summon an elemental and a beast from your deck. Obviously, I've now got the benefit of knowledge, because I've seen decks that are playing this. It's really only seen play in 2 decks, and actually one of them is actually doing okay. It's seen playing Big Rogue right now, where Scourge Illusionist basically gives you a cheat copy of this, so you get a 4/4 copy of Thunderbringer. You play the Thunderbringer dies, and note this is both an elemental and a beast, so sometimes your copied Thunderbringer pulls out Thunderbringer, plus an elemental or a beast in your deck. The other one that did see some play, but it's probably a tier 4 deck, is like a big Shaman list with From the Other Side. Because obviously From the Other Side, the Thunderbringer in your hand, the Thunderbringer dies, triggers a death rattle, and you get 2 copies of what are presumably big beasts and big elementals in your deck. Unfortunately for that deck, I don't think it's actually better than just running the package they normally run, which is still in a tier 4 deck, by the way, where they use the Undead package instead and run stuff like Flesh Behemoth and 10-mana giant card whose name I've forgotten. Going back to Rogue, though, part of the reason why this is seeing so much play is that the pool actually is pretty favourable for Rogue as well. Krakatoa the Colossal is a beast, so you can actually cheat your Krakatoa out. And if you cheat your Krakatoa out, like if it's on your turn, it can act quickly because the claws have rush, right? And then you get the weapon, and you can you can swing with the weapon as well. In that deck, you also typically run elementals like Neptulon and Ragnaros, because Ragnaros does 8 damage quickly, and Neptulon has got rush on it as well. And if you don't play Neptulon, that thing is going to hit you really hard in the face next turn, because not only will it swing with its Wind Fury effect, remember the arms also swing. I think people forget about this, so you're not just doing the 16 damage, right, off the Neptulon attacking, because Neptulon makes your hand go plonk, plonk, then you Wind Furies, plonk, plonk, and then you can make the hands attack as well with just plonk, plonk. So I think in total it's 24 damage, which is almost lethal for a lot of decks. Not including Odin Warrior. Anyway, big problem for this deck though. This guy. What if he just empties the board and doesn't kill your minion? Well, Thunderbringer is going to be sad. So I actually think that Big Rogue, when the new set comes out, is going to have a really horrible time dealing with Reno. And I actually think it's going to basically it's going to just drop down the tier list pretty quickly. See, people are also running this. When I say it's like a big rogue list, people I think have been running it with the mech rogue package as basically just like an end game last hurrah, a last bit of value. And if you can get through that, you typically beat the mech rogue deck. Anyway, we've now had all the cards revealed. Let me know in the comments below what decks you're looking forward to. What decks do you think are going to rise to the tippy top? And let me know if you think that any of my evaluations have been wrong. Have I missed something? Is something snuck under the radar that is actually going to go into a tier 1 deck and I thought, it's going to be tier garbage? Let me know in the comments below. I think in the upcoming days, I'm going to start preparing a star list as well for how I'm going to rate these cards. And just a bit of forewarning on this. I think my rating scheme, because it's obviously kind of like, it's kind of hard just to say card is good, therefore card is 5 stars, card is bad, therefore 1 star. Because sometimes the card is good, but it has no support around it, so you don't see the card. So I think the way I'm going to do this is, if I think the card will see play in a tier 1 deck, I'm going to give it 5 stars. If I think it's going to see play in a tier 2 deck, I'll give it 4. 3, will be 3. And then I think if it's going to be below tier 3, or it'll see some experimentation, maybe in tier 1 or 2 decks, but eventually will drop out, I'll give it 2 stars. And if it won't see any play, I'll give it a 1 star. And then maybe I'll fluctuate stuff by a tiny amount if it sees, like, if it sees a lot of play in, like, all tier 2 decks, I might give it a 5-star regardless, just because of its ubiquity. So I'm going to base it around that type of rating rather than just, you know, card is good. Because Thunderbringer is good. Like, you could give it 5 stars, but it's not being seen... Sorry. It's not seen play in any tier 1 deck, and it's... only seen play in one deck in its tier 2, so I don't think it's really a 5-star card. Anyway, thanks for watching all of these. It has been great. Also, let me know in the comments below if you enjoyed this, because I'll do it in future expansions if you do. Otherwise, I won't, because, you know, it's a little bit harder to set up. And I look forward to the expansion coming out, irrespective of all of my hate for, you know, Reno, and I think he is going to make the game a little bit toxic, at least until he inevitably gets nerfed, because he will be nerfed. I'm going to test out as many decks as I can in the early stages, and just pretend that Reno doesn't exist. I'm just going to pretend he doesn't exist, alright? Anyway, I'll see you for the star reveals. Goodbye.